From KPFK in Los Angeles, California, Valley Free Radio in Florence, Massachusetts, WNUC in Detroit, and BikeTalk.org worldwide, this is Bike Talk.
Bike Talk.
Welcome to Bike Talk. I'm Taylor Nichols.
I'm Nick Richard.
Nick, I just had a colonoscopy. And I think we got to talk about that because we're getting to that age where you got to have that stuff done. My doctor said that I should come back within about 3 years after the last one that I had, and I didn't. I waited about 10 years. And on this most recent colonoscopy, she found a bunch of polyps. So I'm just saying it to you and to anybody who's, maybe 50 years old or older. You got to keep on that stuff. So my polyps were benign, so I'm okay. But I just thought I'd share the news with you that I had a colonoscopy.
What do you think the demographic of our show is?
I'm guessing it's people 40 and above.
Okay. I hope so.
Or at least some of them.
I could get into mine, but I didn't come here prepared for that.
I don't think anyone was prepared for it. But yeah. I thought I'd spring it on them. That was my weekend. What was yours?
My wife, Julie, took me to Boston. She didn't tell me what it was for. It ended up being the David Byrne concert.
No.
And, we saw David, Talking Heads. He also wrote bicycle diaries.
Right.
He rides everywhere. That was a part of his concert. He showed where he had gone that day, the beach he had rode his bike to from the middle of Boston. And there were bike animations that I think he did in the screen behind him. And it was just amazing music.
Did he wear his giant suit?
No. The next day I visited Jim C., our mechanic, Jim Cadenhead, at his bike shop, Battle Road Bikes in Lexington. Wow. And I bought a bunch of stuff.
Oh, great. Well, I think you had a much better weekend than did I. Our first interview is with Dan Langenkamp, and Dan has been on the show before talking about his wife, Sarah. But he's really turned into an advocate. So this is a nice opportunity that I had to sit down and talk with him. And he has a big ride coming up. So this is Dan Langenkamp.
We've been talking about how much do we talk about road violence and how much do we just celebrate cycling? And unfortunately, the two are combined. May 9th of 2023, Dan Langenkamp was on the show with Representative Earl Blumenauer of Oregon talking about a bill they were trying to get passed through Congress honoring Dan's wife, Sarah Langenkamp. Sarah and Dan were both U.S. diplomats, and they served all over the world in dangerous situations. And when they returned from Ukraine in April of 2022, Sarah was killed by a truck that did not have safety guards or side guards on the side of the truck. And since then, Dan has become a huge advocate for safe streets. And Dan joins us again today. Dan Langenkamp, welcome back to Bike Talk.
So glad to be here. Nice to talk to you again.
You are sponsoring a ride in Sarah's memory called the Ride for Your Life in Washington, D.C. on November 16th. And I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about the ride first and about what got you to, move in this direction of becoming a bike advocate and a leader of the bicycle safety, street safety movement.
Well, thanks a lot. I don't consider myself a leader of any movement, a participant in the movement maybe, but there's so many people doing great work in this area, including you. So I'm just a piece of it. I started it because we're here in Washington. Sarah was killed after living in many conflict zones around the world. Near our nation's capital, she was killed. And I felt like we had to do something. And living near Washington, or being part of the Washington area, we had a unique opportunity to speak directly to Congress. So we organized this ride that started where she started that day, traced her route, went by her crash site, and then we went straight to the lawn of Congress. And we got a huge number of people to go. We got Jamie Raskin, our congressperson, to go. And we got a commitment from Earl Blumenauer, who was on the show last time, commitment from him and Raskin to introduce a bill to try to turn this tide. Since Sarah was killed, I've learned a lot about roadway safety. And it was shocking, but to me to learn that she was not actually a freak accident. She was part of a trend. In 2022, we had more people killed on our roadways than ever before in America. So she was part of that. And that number has now been beaten by the number in 2023. So we have this problem that is getting worse. More cyclist deaths than ever. There were 1,166 cyclists killed in 2023, the last year for which we have numbers. And that's part of the overall trend of road death. So more than 40,000 people are killed basically every year. And those are larger numbers than we've ever had.
Right.
More pedestrians as well. So I started this ride to really sort of draw attention, not just to cyclist deaths, but to everything, because this is actually, really a universal feature of American life now. And it shouldn't be, because you are actually much less likely to die on the roads if you're a citizen of Canada or a citizen of most industrialized countries on Earth. We can do better. And that's the whole idea.
Right. So this is the 4th year that the ride has been going on, and it is Sunday, November 16th. And you start in Bethesda, where I guess Sarah started her ride that morning, and you end at the Lincoln Memorial in Washington, D.C. Is that correct?
That's right. We're actually changing the route a little bit so that people can take the metro to the start a little easier. So it's not the same school. It'll be downtown Bethesda. So you can take the metro there and get down there really easily. Yeah.
Great. And only because we are recording this the week that the government shut down, do you see that the government shutting down as a problem for the ride or for you, or how do you see that?
I think it'll be okay. I'm not too worried about it. That's a month and a half away. So if the shutdown lasted 6 weeks, then we're going to have an issue.
Right.
We'll have an issue getting our permit for the Lincoln Memorial because the National Park Service, has to give us that permit. And I'll have a little bit of trouble reaching people because I can't use government employee emails right now. And we have a lot of government employees that show up for this thing. There's a lot of government workers who ride.
Right.
But I think it's a minor, overall a minor
inconvenience. Okay, good. I've not been to Washington, D.C. in a long time, but I hear it's a pretty good biking town.
It's made incredible progress in the last, say, 20 years. Starting with what Earl Blumenauer did. He built the first bike lanes down Pennsylvania Avenue going from the White House to Congress.
Right.
And since then, there's been a lot of bike lanes built. I think what we're facing now, though, is a reckoning, because a lot of these lanes were built without protection. Right. So just paint on the road. And that's what Sarah was killed on.
Right.
A bike lane that seemed like a good idea a long time ago, but which we look at now and say, that's not enough. So people need to review some of these lanes and say they need to be better.
Right. She was riding in a bike lane when the truck turned into her.
Exactly. Yeah. It was like going down the road next to her. And as you mentioned, not only did it have no side underride guards, which few trucks in America do, although they all do in Europe.
Right.
It had no safety features other than mirrors.
Right.
And, that's a norm in America. People should know that when you're riding next to a truck, you are riding next to a very dangerous vehicle that most often can't see you at all. Because of the blind spots that exist. In fact, 27 cyclists could fit in the blind spot that this truck had.
Wow.
According to the Department of Transportation's Research Institute called Volpe. One of the things that we're advocating for, I work with a truck safety advocacy group. One of the things we advocate for are automatic emergency braking in new trucks and retrofitting old trucks.
Right.
That could save, 50% of the deaths on the road, of the trucking deaths on the road.
Wow.
I consider trucks like these big trucks or cement trucks, dump trucks. They're kind of like roaming loaded shotguns.
Right.
Honestly, they're so dangerous. And if you're near one, watch out.
Right.
They often can't see you. They have no safety systems. Drivers that are in a hurry, just like Sarah's driver, to get where they need to go.
Yeah, they're paid by the run, probably. Yeah.
They are. So just be very careful.
Well, I'm glad you said that, because I ride next to trucks, not on purpose, but just because I'm on the road and there's big trucks on the road all the time. And you certainly now have me thinking much more proactively about get out of that space when a truck does pull up next to me. So
Technologically, trucks are making, I'm sorry to interrupt, but
No,
technologically, trucks are making much less progress than passenger cars are. You know, by 2029, all passenger cars have to have AEB, automatic emergency
braking.
brake.
Yeah.
And trucks don't. The most dangerous vehicles on the road don't have a law that says they have to have that yet. So there's extra caution needed there.
Right. I wonder if you could tell us what else is in the Sarah Langenkamp Active Transportation Safety Act.
Right. Yeah. So it is a bill that gives states and communities more flexibility in the way they use federal money to build bike and pedestrian infrastructure. So the way it's set up, you have federal money that flows down to the states every year. That's called formula funding. And with this formula funding, states do all their highway building and all their roadway building. 10% of that can be used for bicycle and pedestrian infrastructure right now. But there's problems. One problem is that communities have to put up a portion of that funding in their own matching funds. They can't use only federal funds if they want to build a bike lane, for example. So this bill says, you know what, for certain types of bike and ped infrastructure, you can use all federal funding. So suddenly you're dropping the matching fund problem.
Right. Great.
And that, you know, matching funds are a huge issue if you're a small community and you got to choose between a library, funding the fire brigade, firemen, and building a bike lane. Often bike lanes lose out. So this really helps that. If you need to connect two disconnected pieces of bike infrastructure, you can use all federal funds. If you need to build proven safety countermeasures, that's a term that the Department of Transportation came up with to define certain projects that actually are proven by data to save lives. So if you want to build a proven safety countermeasure, that can be all federal funding. And it just basically says, states, you get to decide, how you're going to spend this 10%. We're not going to get in your way. And that's a great thing because it'll transform the way states act.
Right. Well, I'm really glad you brought that up because 2 weeks ago on the show, we had Chuck Marone on from Strong Towns, and he talked about this exact thing about how sometimes federal money is not the answer to fix local communities' bicycle ped issues because the federal money is earmarked toward, really big projects and not what we need on the ground. But it sounds like this act will allow local communities to better tailor their federal dollars to exactly what they need.
Chuck is amazing. I bought his book after listening to that episode, and I've invited him to come speak at the ride in November. So right. I consider, his vision is exactly right. We need to rebuild our cities so that they are friendly to bicyclists, pedestrians, and people that just want to walk and get to the store without using a car. Right. So I 100% buy into his vision.
Right.
On this piece, I think that actually there are a couple nuances, and one is that yes, states actually get highway money, and they do decide already how to build highways, but there is not enough flexibility for states. And they are actually impeded from building bike and ped infrastructure because of this 20% match that's required in several of the big highway programs.
Right.
They get that what I call the formula funding, and they're not able to use it to build bike and ped in the way that they want to. So yes, Sarah's bill gives them that flexibility, and that's great. Give the states the money, let them figure it out. They know the communities and they know the roads that are dangerous, right, that need to be fixed. They know if it needs a bike lane or a signal or rumble strips or whatever. So yes, that's why people should support Sarah's bill. And
absolutely.
Actually, let me just make a plug. There is an action alert on the League of American Bicyclists website right now. And we need people to go to that action alert. Just type in League of American Bicyclists Langenkamp, my awful long last name, and fill out the action alert so that we can get senators and Congress people on board with this. They need to hear from us. They have really, if they don't hear from constituents, they don't have the incentive to actually vote in favor of these things.
Right. Well, I'm glad you said that. The last time you were on the show, you were talking about the bill. That was 2023. You're still talking about the bill. Where is the bill in the process of, getting a vote or getting out of committee or passing and, getting into law?
We're more optimistic than ever about it right now. We fought hard the last Congress to get people on board, and we now have Ron Johnson, the conservative senator from Wisconsin, on board. We have Senator Haggerty from Tennessee on board on the Senate side. So it's fully bipartisan in the Senate. We're getting more senators all the time. I had good meetings with people on both sides of the aisle last week. And then on the House side, we have also fully bipartisan. So we are very optimistic. We're fairly confident it'll get folded into the Surface Transportation Reauthorization Act, which is the transportation bill that gets written every 5 years that funds all of our transportation in America. So a hugely important bill is being drafted right now. And several senators have said this is a priority for us. But we're not over the finish line. And that's why we need people to write in, do the action alert. That's why we're holding the ride to bring attention to it just as that thing is getting finalized. So actually super excited about the fact that we found some language. And in this terribly partisan time, we have found something that actually appeals to both sides of the aisle. Because Republicans as well as Democrats believe that states should be able to decide how to use the federal money that exists. And everybody believes in saving lives, I hope.
Yeah. Some people believe in, that you can't take anything away from the car. I think that's partly what our current president just signed an executive order that, if you impede on automobile, movement, then your project is going to get cut. So the fact that this is bipartisan, I totally agree, is hugely important.
Nobody wants moms getting killed. Nobody wants kids getting killed. And we all want our communities to be like the communities that a lot of us grew up with in the 70s and 80s even, where we could send our kids out into the street and not worry about them. Well, there's more traffic now and cars are bigger and heavier and there are bigger blind spots. In order for that to exist, we've got to do a few things. And this bill would really help that.
Right. I like how you said that in order for these bigger cars to exist, we have to at least make some safe space on the road for people to choose another form of transportation. Because I don't think those big cars are going away anytime soon, even though we just spoke about China and how China is moving back to the bicycle after embracing the American automobile for the last 20 or so years. Dan Langenkamp, thank you for all of the work. The ride is called The Ride for Your Life. It is Sunday, November 16th. You can get information by going to the Washington Area Bicyclists Association.
It's WABA, yep. So you go to waba.org and write in Ride for Your Life 2025 and you'll find it.
Right. It's a hugely important bill in memory of Sarah Langenkamp. Dan Langenkamp, thanks for carrying on the fight and for coming back on the show. And I look forward to having you on the show again.
Thank you so much, Taylor. I love the show. It's an amazing piece. Thank you.
Thanks.
Take care.
So that was Dan Langenkamp talking about the Ride for Your Life, which is November 16th in Washington, D.C.
All right.
Stacey Randecker, who is on our show a lot, she's the bike thought person at the end of the show, and she's done some interviews for us. She got hit by a car. We thought when she told us about it that it was a pretty cut and dry case. She was just saying that it's been taking a long time. So I thought, Nick, we should ask Jim Pocrass of Pocrass and De Los Reyes, our lawyer, to kind of explain to us and our audience why some of these injury cases take a long time. So, Jim Pocrass, welcome back to Bike Talk.
Thank you for having me again. And I think I might be able to shed some light with regard to why it does take so long to get a settlement in a case.
Yeah, please do it, because it seems like the car was at fault. She's hurt. She needs money to get better. What's the problem?
When cases come into the office, the first thing that we have to do is take a look at the liability aspect of the case and make sure that we get all the investigation done, witnesses, any type of videos or surveillance videos, and get liability pinned down. I'm going to assume that for the purposes of what you're asking me, is that liability is 100%. And, with Stacey, and I do know about her case, it is 100%. But the faster you get to a lawyer And the more information that you get right at the beginning, the better off it is for the whole case. However, the first thing that comes up is with regard to the medical treatment and the injury aspect of a case. And that is get a proper diagnosis, get treatment for that, and see how well they've recovered from the crash. And that's the thing that does take a long time. When you settle a personal injury case, it isn't like a workman's compensation case, but once you settle it, it's settled forever and you can't reopen it. So you have to make sure that somebody gets proper medical treatment, and that can take anywhere from 3 to 4 months or longer, depending on the severity of the injury. The person that's injured can't settle a case until they know what their injuries are. Otherwise, if they settle soon and then all of a sudden 6 months down the line, it gets worse, and then they don't get proper compensation for all of the injuries. So it isn't the insurance company that's holding off on that. It's more of the attorney and the person that's injured. They have to let that time period go by until they reach something what's called maximum medical improvement. It's called MMI, before trying to even start settlement. So once they reach MMI, then I will get all the medical records in, evaluate what the past, the present, and the future pain and suffering is, and the past and the present medical expenses, and any other out-of-pocket expenses, loss of earnings, post-traumatic stress syndrome, anxiety. Then I can evaluate the case and make a demand on the insurance company to try to initiate settlement. And this is where we run into the delay tactics of insurance companies.
So that's where the negotiation might come in. They delay and then they come back with a counteroffer or something like that?
Right. They may come back and they'll say, well, I think that she had pre-existing conditions or degenerative conditions. I want their medical records for the past 5 years. We may want to have them examined by our own medical doctors. And they will usually make a low-ball offer to see how low they can get a settlement, at the beginning of a case.
And if you can't settle it, then what happens? It goes to trial?
Well, no. In my practice, I push for trying to get a pre-litigation settlement offer that's at least in the ballpark. If it's not in the ballpark, I'll suggest either going to mediation or try to get it out of some adjuster's hands that don't usually know what they're doing, and get it to somebody higher up that has more experience and more authority. If I can't get them to move and they still stay what I call out of the ballpark, like maybe offering $50,000 on a case that's worth $500,000, when I have no other choice, then I will file a lawsuit.
So that means that the injured party may not see any kind of recourse for a long time.
Well, it could be. The things that really hold it up are the severity of the injuries. Once I get it into litigation, that's filing a lawsuit in the Superior Court to get it into the judicial system. Then it gets out of the adjuster's hands, out of the insurance company's hands, and they will turn it over to an attorney to determine, what the value of the damages are. Then again, I push for mediation. So getting up to the litigation is probably about a 6-month period. Negotiations for about 2 months. And once it gets into a lawsuit, we're talking about another 6 months before we come up with the discovery that's gone through and try to settle it again at maybe a mediation. But the ultimate thing is to try to get a trial date. And if we can't come to a resolution, you have to get a lawyer that is a trial lawyer and will take it through to trial. But part of the game plan of the insurance companies is to drag these things out so that people get, mad at their lawyers as to why it's taking so long. And, if people need the money, they may settle for less money. And then the ultimate thing is that the insurance companies know in the back of their mind that somebody may die. And if they die while the action is still pending, you lose all of your pain and suffering. And the only thing that you can get is the medical bills. And the insurance companies know that there is a certain statistic that people will die, and then they get like a free ride on the pain and suffering.
Wow. Sounds like someone in Stacey's position shouldn't count on a payout for a long time.
Yeah, but the thing that gets cases settled is getting a case to a trial. If they won't settle, a lot of cases are settled on the courtroom steps because the insurance companies know at that point that the plaintiff's attorney, knows what they're doing. They're ready to go to trial, and they will come up with the money. 95% of the cases settle without going to trial. That's a very large percent.
Well, I think it's easier for us as a society to build safe streets so people don't get hit by cars. Jim Pocrass of Pocrass and De Los Reyes, thanks again.
How about a little news from Charlie?
Hey, it's Charlie here with the week's news, starting off with a few items courtesy of Ted Rogers of the Biking in LA blog. Ted reports on a Washington Post writer based in Southern California who wrote about the danger of unregulated electric motorbikes, but he didn't do the best job of separating them from regular and legal pedal assist e-bikes. E-bike lash is real, and this didn't help. Ted also writes that CalBike pushed state legislature to make clear the distinction between pedal assist e-bikes and e-motorbikes, which was rejected. From KTLA, last week there was a Boo Boo Bandage Brigade Bonanza. Community members from Los Angeles Walks, Public Matters, DTLA Mobility for All, and Fastlink DTLA shone a light on sidewalks, bike lanes, parks, etc. that urgently need repair. They referred to these cracks, missing ramps, and empty tree wells as ouchies. Fixes would help cyclists, pedestrians, and especially those with disabilities. WSLS in Roanoke, Virginia did a story about the week without driving and how it's uncovered some lacking spots in the area's public transit. Laura Hartman, the president of the Bus Riders of Roanoke Advocacy Group, or BRAG, had a great quote. She said, "We need to stop thinking about transportation as an individual choice. When we move from a private space in our home to some other place, we're moving through public space, and that public space needs to serve everyone, not just an individual." Advocates in Vancouver are working with city councilor and friend of the show Lucy Maloney to extend the SkyTrain to UBC instead of just relying on overcrowded buses like they are now. The provincial government committed to building a SkyTrain extension to UBC in 2008, but the project hasn't moved forward really at all. Lucy Maloney is bringing a motion to City Council that will get the government moving and committing to making this happen for the tens of thousands of UBC students, faculty, and staff who could benefit.
Thanks, Charlie, for bringing us the news. It's good to hear your voice.
And next we have a report from Colin Parent.
The title of his article was The Powerless Broker, which is taken from, of course, the famous Robert Caro book about Robert Moses, the Power Broker.
Colin at Circulate San Diego came out with this report, The Powerless Broker, about why we can't have nice things, I guess, in infrastructure with Lindsay.
Welcome to Bike Talk. My name is Lindsay Sturman, and today I'm here with Colin Parent, the author of The Powerless Brokers, Why California Can't Build Transit. Welcome, Colin. We're very excited to have you.
Thanks, Lindsay.
The Powerless Brokers is a report you wrote, and it really explains why we're not building transit, or one of the many reasons. So where did this idea come from to write this report, and what are you trying to say?
I run a nonprofit in the San Diego area called Circulate San Diego, and we publish a lot of research and do a lot of advocacy around public transit and housing and bike facilities. And one of the things that we've been thinking about over the years is why it's so expensive and difficult to build transit. And we're able to kind of narrow this down on something that we could actually accomplish, which is to focus on the pre-construction permitting challenges. You know, the transit agency, they decide on a project, they do environmental review, they get funded, they hire a contractor, and then they have to go out and try to get a bunch of permits before they're allowed to build anything. And that's the piece that our report really focuses on. We identified 4 different case studies in the report. The biggest and most famous one is California High-Speed Rail. In that project, that's like, a $100 billion project. It's decades behind what anyone expected. The worst examples from that are where you actually have some city managers saying to the newspaper that they're going to hold this project hostage, and that California High-Speed Rail needs to pay for a bunch of infrastructure projects totally unrelated to the high-speed rail as a condition to get those projects built. And I'm in San Diego, you're in LA, you're paying for that. Mm-hmm. Right. And it's good for the county of Madera, but is it good for California? Definitely not.
Who's to blame? Who's the villain of the story? Or is there not one?
I think the villain is diffuse. One of the things that we talked about in the report, we sort of borrowed some of the framing that Mark Dunkelman put in his book, Why Nothing Works, which is that there's this tension between wanting to use sort of Hamiltonian thinking, where you assign authority to sort of a central agency or a central government to do things. And then we also have this impulse to disaggregate authority, a more Jeffersonian impulse to spread the power around, to diffuse it. The villain here is that we've let that Jeffersonian tendency go a little too far. And so what used to be that we had the Robert Moseses of the world, the power broker in Robert Caro's book, who had sort of tyrannical power to build things, and we thought that was bad. So we tried to solve that by making sure that no one has any power to do anything. But it turns out that's bad too.
Oh,
And so
interesting.
so that's why we call the report the Powerless Brokers, right? It's not the power broker, it's the opposite. And the solution to that is not to like recreate Robert Moses, but we do need to inch a little bit closer to that. We need to make sure that when we say to a transit authority that we want you to build something, that they actually have the tool set to build it. And right now, that's just not the case.
And how much does this go back to the public's resistance to transit? I'm just extending it to bike lanes because, we see a lot of that. How much is this sort of just, people don't think it's going to work, they don't support it?
There is some of that for sure. But really, what we're talking about is a part of the process for building these projects where the public isn't even always involved. When a public transit agency, they're deciding whether or not to build a project, they have public hearings, they do a bunch of community engagement, elected decision makers decide to go ahead with the project. People are kind of haters about bike lanes or public transit. That's the part where they're going to get engaged and may successfully derail a project or not. But then sometimes the projects do get approved, right? And then the challenge then is that we're identifying is when the transit agency goes out and they want to build their bus project or build their light rail project, or occasionally it's a bike project, they're not asking the public's permission. The public has already given permission through that process.
Right.
They're asking permission from the Public Works Department of some jurisdiction. They're asking for a utility district to move some wires. And it's the opposition or bureaucracy that's happening on those sort of staff to staff levels that is the permitting challenge. We as advocates oftentimes see the sort of public pushback to some of these things, but our reports identify this whole other set of challenges that are not the public, but oftentimes just another public agency who doesn't want to help.
It's really interesting because two things come to mind. One is, what we see in LA around all of this stuff, that even when neighbors ask for something, they want a good thing that, LA DOT is trying to give us bike lanes and bus lanes and bulb outs and all that. And then when neighbors ask for it, it's like, oh, that's going to take 3 years to even get in the queue. But it's also making me think of something else, which is I've read that in Spain, the reason why they built their high-speed rail so efficiently is that the agencies talk to each other and there's a very high level of trust. And I wonder if that's something that you're seeing, is that these agencies aren't used to talking to each other.
That's definitely a factor. And so one of the things that we talked about in the report is that for a lot of these transit projects that are going through a small city, for example, the small city doesn't have anyone there who's ever worked on a transit project before, right? And that's like forgivable. Why should they? They're like, it's a totally new thing for them. And that lack of understanding, lack of trust, lack of previous interaction does in fact make those projects more difficult.
Have you seen places where, there is either that trust or that spirit of collaboration? Because then, of course, the other side of it you mentioned is the Hamiltonian version. Is there a Robert Moses just for good? Because the problem with Robert Moses was he had this very terrible idea that somehow freeways or highways were the solution. But, if they were for good, it would be a very different story. Are you seeing places where it really is working or where people can change?
I think the San Diego example is an example. It's working better than other places on some projects. And you're seeing some of that in, some of the European examples and other examples where there's more of like one entity that's responsible for doing these projects. And that tends to work better. But I'll tell you, though, that we're borrowing the Robert Moses frame to like get some people's attention, right? And to make a contrast, right? But we take great pains to say that the solution is not to create another Robert Moses. It's not to create a Robert Moses for good, right? Because you could definitely displace a whole bunch of people building transit lines too, right? You could do a lot of damage to environmentally sensitive land by, building, bike lanes through them, without any concern for those sorts of things. And so we don't want to say that the solution is just to like empower a transit agency to do whatever they want without any concern or regard for other things, or to have no political accountability. No, that's not the solution. But what we do need to do is just sort of rebalance those two impulses to make sure that those agencies, they have to listen to people, they have to be deliberate, they may have to do some environmental analyses, those sorts of things, but that they aren't subject to like 1,000 veto points, which is what they are right now.
Right. You hear that a lot, is that we have hundreds of thousands of veto points, just let's open the gate. So you profiled the Purple Line in Los Angeles, the D line, although I really wish we just keep calling it the Purple Line because I think it's a great name.
That was a really interesting one. That's a big project going under Wilshire Boulevard. And what's interesting about that is that unlike high-speed rail, so high-speed rail, you have like these local governments who probably don't even want high-speed rail to happen. So they're like holding the project hostage to get some money out of it. In LA Metro is building the Purple Line extension through largely the city of LA, and goes some other places too. And the city of LA controls the MTA board. The mayor is the big player there, and the city of LA is supportive of the project. They want this project to happen. And yet they're continuing to have a lot of the same permitting challenges that we are seeing when there isn't that political alignment. And so what we documented in this report was that there's just dozens of times where LA Metro proposed to build something, and then the Department of Water and Power or Public Works Department says, no, you have to redesign that entire thing, and it's going to cost millions and millions more. It's not a situation where the city is trying to help the project move forward. They're actually like getting in the way of the project. And there's a variety of reasons for that. But I think what this demonstrates is if you just have two different entities being involved in this, you might just have two different engineers with two different ideas. And if the engineer at the city just doesn't like how something's designed, is not that motivated to help the project, then it can create some real challenges to the project. There's currently just like not a lot of obligation by the city staff in these different departments to like process these in good faith or to help to get to yes. And that's just a pretty endemic problem that's not related to political disagreement, right? It's just like a couple of bureaucrats from two different public agencies. They're both on CalPERS, like they can't get on the same page.
I suspect this really tells us a lot about what goes on in the bike world, which is that you've got a lot of different opinions and people aren't collaborating, and then everything takes a million years.
Absolutely. And this is something we touched on just a teeny bit in the report, but in the San Diego area, Sandag and the city and Caltrans get along pretty well. They've got a pretty good track record of building projects together. And the notable exception to that is that Sandag has been responsible for have chosen to build some big bike projects in the city of San Diego, to their great credit. But they have had a lot of trouble getting those projects designed, built, and approved when they're in the city of San Diego. It's very maddening for those of us who are bicycle advocates. We're grateful that Sandag wants to do this, but the city says that they want bike projects for their climate action plan, for Division Zero commitment, yet the interaction between the two bureaucracies oftentimes results in substantial delay, added cost, and people have actually died on corridors where projects have been delayed.
What's the fix?
The same fix that we need for transit is for bike lanes too. Is if we're asking some entity to build something, we need to give them more authority to actually do that. The most significant option would be to just give transit authorities the ability to self-permit for their own projects. That'd be pretty strong medicine. It's not common in the US, but it's pretty common elsewhere. We could do that. We could make the criteria for applications for these permits clear and transparent, and require that the cities or whatever entity is giving these permits abide by those rules, and then just remove some of the discretion from them.
Colin, thank you so much for coming on Bike Talk. Your report, Powerless Brokers, really is an amazing read, and it really gives us a path forward to fixing this really huge issue.
Yeah, well, no, I appreciate you talking with me about it, Lindsay, and hopefully we'll see some reforms that come out of the research.
Great to have Lindsay back on the show and having her doing the interview. And we need nice things. So I'm glad that she was talking about that.
And on the topic of not having nice things, we wanted daylighting in New York City, but it's being held up by an Upper West Side council member. And I have the director of Streetopia Upper West Side.
Yeah, Carl's been on the show in the past. And, daylighting is such an easy thing. so that people can see when they cross the street. That's all.
You would think it would be pretty popular, but maybe not with the right people.
Hi, Carl.
Hey, Nick. How's it going?
Good. I saw you prominently featured in the Streets blog article about daylighting on the Upper West Side.
Yeah. Well, the council member up there, Gale Brewer, is making news again for some sort of peculiar orientations towards street safety.
What's going on?
Well, we've been a part of a coalition of groups working on daylighting over a year now. New York State has a law that prohibits parking a motor vehicle within 20 feet of a crosswalk where there is a stop sign or a traffic signal. Maybe just any crosswalk, but 20 feet clear, no vehicles. And that's obviously a safety measure. It increases visibility for every street user. If you're in a car, you can see who's there and wanting to cross. If you're crossing the street, you can see if cars are coming. Works the same for cyclists. Common sense. A lot of other municipalities and states have similar laws. New York City, peculiarly, is exempted from this state law. Consequently, we have vehicles parking right up to, and in some cases, overlapping sidewalks. Sometimes they'll be there when they do the striping too, and you'll see like a cutout of the zebra stripes where a car was parked and never got moved. So it's bad for safety to be exempted from this state law. It's also just bizarre. And so we've been talking to community boards, we've been talking to constituents in neighborhoods about this issue. Overwhelmingly, when we explain the condition, they recognize it in their lived experience. When we explain that it's state law and New York City doesn't do it, it does not compute for them. This idea of universal daylighting, of passing a bill at the city council level to require that, is broadly popular. Off the top of my head, I don't know the numbers of community boards that have signed on, but it represents over 2 million New Yorkers. So very popular. There's a bill in city council right now. It had 26 co-sponsors, which is one more than is needed to pass. It had a hearing a few months ago. It has not yet come to a vote, but Councilmember Gale Brewer on the Upper West Side removed her name earlier this week from the bill. So now it no longer has 26 co-sponsors. This is bad partly because without a guaranteed majority, it's unlikely to be brought to a vote. It's also bad because it sends the signal that street safety is somehow not important. To complicate matters even further, the Department of Transportation put out some data a few months ago where they did a sort of flawed study looking at intersections that had a fire hydrant adjacent to a crosswalk, and came to the conclusion, even though there's a caveat in their report that says that you can't trust the data, that daylighting intersections without putting something there, without hardening them, putting a bike rack, putting a plant, or putting a stone, would somehow make intersections more dangerous. They're drawing this sort of like correlation where there really is not enough evidence to be doing that. Certainly you can't prove causation, and that was enough to get Councilmember Brewer off the bill. It's outrageous. I mean, I honestly am rather speechless that the council member would remove her name from a bill that is so popular, that does have a common sense sort of element to it. Her constituents overwhelmingly want it. The community board overwhelmingly wants it. And here she is making news for siding with what? She's buying the flawed report from the DOT. And there is already a law in the books that requires the Department of Transportation, the DOT, to daylight 100 intersections across New York City every year. There are about 40,000 intersections in New York City. I don't know how many of them are currently daylit, but we're talking on the order of decades to fully implement daylighting or some other safety treatment at those intersections at the current pace. So it really means entrenching the status quo, not to sound dramatic about it, but the deadly status quo, entrenching that for long after she's out of office. It's a very strange position to take, and very frustrating for advocates, and I think very demoralizing for advocates and her constituents who just really they just want to live in a city where they don't have to worry about crossing the street.
How far back does this put you? Does this put everybody?
It's a great question. We've got another few months of this council, and this bill lives on until December 31st, basically. So we're very much intending to try to bring this to a vote and try to get it passed as advocates. The sponsor of it, Councilmember Julie Wan in Queens, is committed to it. The chair of the Transportation Committee, Sylvina Brooks Powers, she is committed to it. There are still, 25 other council members whose votes could prove to be the deciding factor. To complicate matters worse, we're still dealing with the Adams administration, who, safe to say, will likely veto this if we don't have a veto-proof majority. But even just getting it passed with a majority and getting it vetoed would be some momentum into the next administration and the next council to hopefully get this over the line. It truly is a matter of life and death. We've had cases in the city where children have been killed by car drivers at intersections that, had they been daylit, those kids might still be alive. It's just reprehensible, I think, for a council member to sort of side with this bureaucratic bean counting. And especially when the report, even within its methodology, it suggests that when those intersections are hardened, when there is something there that replaces the car but that you can see through and over, there is an increase in safety. It's maddening. I tell you, I feel like a bit like I'm being gaslit.
Rather than daylit.
Exactly. Nick, at the heart of every street safety and livable streets fight is parking. New York City is a prime example of how we have given over the vast majority of our curb space to the free storage of private automobiles. That's the thing that I think is the biggest friction point in universally daylighting every intersection in the city. When Councilmember Brewer was asked about this recently by a reporter, she said that the DOT told her that 13,000 parking spaces would be removed in her district. There might not even be that many parking spaces total in her district, not just at intersections. And I did a quick calculation, something on the order of magnitude of like 260 odd intersections times 8 daylighted spots. You arrive at somewhere around 2,000, 2,100 potential parking spaces being removed, if we want to frame it that way, which I would take issue with. When you account for bus stops, fire hydrants, spots that may already be daylit, you're looking at something more like 1,500 to 1,800. An order of magnitude lower than this figure that's being cited by Gale Brewer, presumably from the DOT. Now, the DOT is backpedaling a little bit from that number. They say they don't know where it came from, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But it just shows that this is really ill-conceived. And even thinking of those spaces as parking spots that would be taken away is a completely backwards approach. We should think about those as safety spots that parking is currently encroaching on. We just need to sort of clear those out of the way so that we can have the safest streets as we possibly can.
Carl, thanks for all your great work at Streetopia, Upper West Side.
Streetopia.city, C-I-T-Y, Streetopia.city. And you can find our campaigns and go to the news section if you want to read some of these articles about this current daylighting kerfuffle.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Nick.
Next up is Ride the Vines. Gary Oddi of Bike Temecula Valley has a ride coming up on October 19th. And it sounds like you ride a bike and you drink a little bit of wine, which sounds good to me.
All right, let's hear that.
We're often talking on the show about different kinds of bike rides around the country. There's a great ride in Temecula, California, which is, I think, about an hour and a half or 2 hours south of LA. I'll get the information from our two guests, but it's called Ride the Vines, and it's hosted by the Bike Temecula Valley Bicycle Coalition. And today we have two guests, Gary Oddi, who is the founder of Bike Temecula Valley, and Ernie Castro, who is the president of the board. Ernie and Gary, welcome to Bike Talk.
Well, thank you, Taylor. Great to be here.
Absolutely. Ernie?
Yeah, thank you for having us. We really appreciate it.
The Ride the Vines ride is on Sunday, October 19th. And I wonder, Gary, if you could give us a little bit of history. I think this is your 4th year, and tell us a little bit about the ride.
Yes. So I'm Gary Oddi, and I am the founder of Bike Temecula Valley. And we are in our 4th year, and it's just an amazing ride, and it's a charity ride also. And our main beneficiary is Mission Hope, which is basically a food pantry, but they do provide services for folks who are trying to find housing. And so it is basically, if you ride, you are donating to Mission Hope and help us fight hunger and homelessness in our area. We also contribute some of our benefits to elementary school PTAs and middle school PTA, and also we are allowing a sponsorship for one of our parent support groups of one of our mountain bike high school mountain bike teams.
Oh,
So
I love that. Yeah.
that's kind of the charity aspect of it, but we really like the idea of bringing our community together over an activity like this that really highlights some of the great infrastructure we have here in the city of Temecula, and then some of the calm routes we have out into our just cherished wine country we have out here in Temecula Valley. So it's a wonderful ride for whatever level you choose to ride.
I often say my two favorite things are biking and films, but my three favorite things are biking, films, and wine. So it sounds like this might be a good ride for me. People always talk about, Napa and Sonoma, but Temecula really is a wine region, isn't it?
Absolutely. We are now becoming a mature wine growing region, and we have around 50 wineries out here. And we've again the Ride the Vines is again trying to promote that a bit too. And we've brought some of our wineries into sponsoring and providing things for our silent auction. So we do go out there and tour their vineyards and ride by some of those wineries. But it's we think the best way to see the wineries too is by bike.
Right.
It's a lot slower, and you really get to see the beauty of the valley.
Right, and it is a beautiful valley. Ernie, I think Gary said there are 3 rides. You want to explain what the 3 rides are?
So we have 3 routes. The 50-mile route, which is a tour of the wine country. It's a road ride. It's a kind of a rolling ride with some pretty good hills. And then we have a 30-mile ride, which is shorter, which we feel will attract road riders, but it'll also fit e-bikes. Experienced e-bike riders can easily handle 30 miles.
Sure.
And then we're going to have a 15-mile community ride that will be guided. It's all on trails. We'll have a lead and a sweep. It's for beginners or people who don't feel comfortable riding out on the roads. It's flat, so it's easy for people to do.
Great. Well, I love to hear that e-bikes are welcome on the ride. I think that's a big improvement. And I love that you have a 15-mile ride as an entry-level ride for people, because I think once people realize they can ride 15 miles, they go, if I can do 15, I can do 30. And soon they are doing 30, and then they're doing 50, and maybe a year or two later, they're doing a century.
Yeah, we're trying to get families out there, and the 15 is an out and back, so if they feel like it's too much, they can turn around at any point, so they don't even have to go the 15. It's not a loop.
Great. Gary, I saw that in the past, you guys have raised almost $20,000 for the Cycle for Hope. And I think that's such a great thing. Fighting homelessness and fighting hunger is so important. And I love the fact that that is the focus of this ride.
Absolutely, and we continue to grow it and hope that we have a better turnout this year. We've definitely grown our sponsorships this year, so we're hoping to present even bigger checks this year than we did last year.
Well, again, the ride is Ride the Vines. It's on Sunday, October 19th this year. It looks like there's a pretty good party at the end of the ride, and I think that's a great way to celebrate everybody coming together.
During the time that the riders are out on the road and when they're in the start village, we do have a group coming in, the Walk and Rollers, and they're putting on a bike safety village for the youth of our community or any novice riders who, they actually can teach you how to ride at that time. So we're making that a big theme in that Bike Temecula Valley works in conjunction with our school district and our city on bike safety. So that theme of having a bike safety village in our start-finish area is ongoing throughout the morning as the riders are out on the road and before our after party.
Oh, that sounds great. Well, Gary Oddi and Ernie Castro of Bike Temecula Valley, thanks for sponsoring the ride and thanks for coming on Bike Talk.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Taylor.
All right, you going on that ride?
Well,
Taylor?
I'm planning on it. I can talk Marga into going with me. My wife, I want to do it with her, and I think it would be a good ride to do with her because she likes wine also.
Sounds romantic. That's the show.
I think so.
You want to thank our guests?
Yeah, Dan Langenkamp, Jim Pocrass, Colin Parent, Carl Mahaney, Oddi. We also want to thank our regulars, Julie Richard, Charlie Lighthizer, Amy Ziering, Lindsay Sturman, Stacey Randecker, and Josh Haglund.
You got a quote to take us out?
I do have a quote. In this time that we're in and how important it is to speak up, I read a quote that said, "Silence is not always golden. Sometimes it's yellow." And I thought that was kind of a good quote, meaning that it takes bravery sometimes to speak up. And that's what we're trying to do on the show. That's what we want our champions to do. And that's what we want our politicians to do.
Right on. Thanks, Taylor.
Ride safe.
Hi, this is Stacey with a bike thought. Maximum medical improvement. That's a term that I wish I never had to learn. As you heard, I was hit by a driver on July 31st. He crossed right in front of me while I was on a bright green bike lane. I was traveling at about 20 miles per hour and could not stop in time, crashing right into the door of that SUV. It's been about 10 weeks since that fateful day. I've improved a lot, but I'm still limping in the morning and throughout the day to compensate for the pain. How will I know when I've reached maximum medical improvement? Will I get back to my old self, or will I have to accept a new normal? My hip was affected. Am I going to be one of those people complaining about my hip down the line? What I want more than anything is for this to never have happened. If only those in charge of our streets and our elected officials had to feel injuries like mine or the loss that Dan Langenkamp knows so well, or absorb all of those stats that Streetopia's Carl Mahaney has at his fingertips. Side guards on trucks, daylighting intersections, fully protected bike lanes. These are the simple fixes that will help people outside of cars. Only when the decision makers feel the losses we bear will we have any hope of change. This episode of Bike Talk is brought to you by the offices of Pocrass and De Los Reyes, with offices in Los Angeles and Bakersfield, and serving all of Southern California.
Bike Talk is a project of CRSP and the Los Angeles Eco-Village Institute. And that was Bike Talk. If you have a story, a tip, or a topic, head over to biketalk.org and send us a message. Talk again next week.
Get on your bike, sit on the seat, speed on the pedals, and run around. Get that car out of my way, I wanna ride my bike today. Keep me fit, get me there, I won't go stinking up the alley behind the daily grind. Let your mind unwind, if it's life, pretend to life, better get yourself a bike. Get yourself a bike. Oh, 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 get yourself a bike.